Hello, hello. Welcome to Back to Life, the podcast where we explore recovery and creativity, whatever that may mean to you. This is the third episode, and I'm so happy to hear that so many of you enjoyed the first couple of episodes. Some of you have even left some lovely reviews, and that has really made me smile. And it also means that other people are more likely to listen. So thank you so much for that. I'm your host, by the way. I'm Millie. I'm a DJ and broadcaster and a person in recovery from a lot of stuff, really. Addiction, mental health challenges, eating disorders, lots of stuff. It's now really important to me to challenge the stigma that still exists around so much of this stuff and to use my experience to hopefully help others still in the darkness. And that leads me on nicely to our guest this week, who's doing exactly that. Her name is Gemma Jennison. Gemma is a registered mental health nurse and full-time lecturer in Birmingham. She's also studying for a PhD in black males, mental health and hip-hop. She's also been a music promoter for the last 20 years or so, currently with Sip the Juice, and if that wasn't enough, she's also a mum. I came across Gemma through her project Man Down, which is a film, training programme and community tackling male mental illness and distress, specifically in the music industry. I actually hadn't met Gemma before this interview, but we got on so well that I know we're going to stay in touch. She's an absolutely incredible woman, as you'll hear, funny, sharp, compassionate and a true survivor. And before we get started, I just need to let you know that we're going to be talking about mental illness and suicide, mainly within the context of prevention. But if that's going to trigger you, then perhaps find something else to listen to or listen to one of our previous episodes. So yeah, let's get into it. I started off by asking Gemma if there was a personal reason for her interest in mental health.
My mum had Munchausen's by proxy and bipolar disorder, and was really poorly treated by services, social services, psych services, GPs. I remember much of my childhood being palmed off to other family members or friends of friends who were aunties who weren't aunties, and seeing my mum really living in a trauma set of really self-deprecating language, self-deprecating behaviour, starving herself, being really chaotic in her mood, being really labile, so being really happy one minute and really sad the next. I never really understood it to be what we now know as bipolar, but there was manifestations of illness that were levelled towards me and my brothers. Munchausen's by proxy is a sort of illness or fabricated illness that is perpetuated onto somebody else, and generally it's generally maternal towards their towards siblings or children or whatever. So my mum did it towards me and my brothers to a lesser or greater degree depending on which one of us you spoke to. But my mum constantly had me in hospital for one thing or another, and this really started to have this huge impact on me, and I started to develop what I think perhaps is some sort of personality disorder as a result of that. I started to live in this alternate reality of life that wasn't true, and started to lie to my friends about what I was living within because I was so ashamed of it. I was in and out of people's homes, I was in and out of care, and my mum then became really physically ill. I still have lasting reminders of those behaviours. I've got a really bad gut because of my mum doing things that would harm me to get me into hospital, broken limbs and those sorts of things. So, you know, the lasting impact is still there. Also seeing my mum being taken away in an ambulance several times and those sorts of things. And my mum being one hand the best person in the world and then on the other hand being someone who was really spiteful and really hateful, who used to say that I was being given away and making me pack my bags for social services and waiting at the window for them. So, in adult life, these sort of trauma sets manifested in me having, eating disorders, and I used to comfort eat, and I used to secretly eat, and I used to binge eat, and then I would make myself sick because I knew that what I was doing was really harmful. And then I got into really bad addictive cycles of wanting to go out and party and, all of that stuff, getting lost in the weekend and all those sorts of things. And my mum became physically ill with emphysema when I was in my early teens, and died. But in actual fact, she took her own life while she was an inpatient at a hospital, because she had no real quality of life, and the narrative her whole life has always been that she was really problematic, really difficult, and really complex. And then you add to that the fact that she couldn't ever breathe. My mum led a really exciting life up until she had my brothers and I. She was a bunny girl, and had this really illustrious life of being a dancing girl who was, revered by many a celebrity, chased by many of a celebrity, and I would argue, looking back on those times, was probably quite badly exploited by some of them. So she was a really complex lady, and took her own life. And after that, I just had this real sense of not really belonging anywhere. I had no relationship with my family. I'm an island, and that can be really, really difficult at times. To say that even out loud is quite tough. So I've always had to sort of fend for myself, and I've always had this really sort of tough external layer where people always tell me that, I'm either really intimidating or really charming, depending on what side of me you get. But all of that is sort of, harbouring quite a lot of trauma and quite a lot of upset and distress that I sort of still live within. And despite the amount of therapy, the amount of tablets that have been forced down my throat, or told me that they'd be great for me, I still live within. So becoming a mental health nurse was something that sort of acted as a sort of catharsis, but acted as a sort of an education as well into understanding what I'd lived through with my mum, and the provision of care that we have in place now versus what we had in the 80s and early 90s, and how hugely different that is. But also the fact that I just would never want anybody to live through what I lived through. I'd never want to hear anybody living those stories and living those lives. And I took all of those things into my adulthood, and I reacted really badly to them. I was a terrible friend, I was a terrible partner, and until I became a mum, I had no real concept of what it was to be in a healthy, loving relationship, or to understand what parental love really looked like.
Wow, you've really, really been through so much. That's a really tough start. But just something that came to mind when you mentioned that you perhaps had a personality disorder. I was talking to a clinical psychologist for another piece of work that I was doing, and she was talking about basically mental health services, and our approach to mental health is not going to really move forward until we recognise the impact of developmental trauma. And that was really the thing, that often we kind of put that in the box of, oh, this person's got a personality disorder, but what is a personality? Where does it stem from? And it's usually from developmental trauma. And what you've just outlined is huge amounts of developmental trauma. But I guess, the symptoms of that, they don't fall neatly into a particular diagnosis necessarily, but they do impact a person's life or ever.
I think it's really important to point out that up until about 2012, 2013, personality disorders weren't ever in the diagnostic criteria. There was a real stigma around personality disorders because it was perceived that personality disorder would be just people with behavioural problems, and to some degree that is true, but to a great degree what we're seeing is a physical manifestation and the outpouring of distress. And what we're seeing is maladaptive strategies of coping in a response to developmental distress or developmental trauma. And I can tell you, as a nurse, the amount of times I hear or have heard on wards when people say they're just a PD, they're just a personality disorder, and the reductionist view of what those people are doing, how they're living their lives, and why can't they just behave? Why can't they just get a grip? Why can't they just instead of saying, what's happened here? What are we dealing with? What are you battling through? What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? And why do they manifest this way? Instead of saying, what are you doing this for, and being really judgmental and accusatory, why are we not saying, let me listen to that? And we don't listen to that.
Yeah. Personality disorder, if we're going to use that term, I mean, certainly like people with demonstrating those symptoms or those behaviours or those manifestations definitely are really difficult. And I talk from someone who's also diagnosed with a personality disorder. It's definitely a really difficult person to treat, handle, interact with. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a huge stigma, and it's like, and even the word is just horrible. Like it's like
I hate
like
the
there's
title.
something fundamentally wrong with who you are. Basically, is what it sounds like, a personality disorder.
You're disordered. Therefore, we expect you to behave this way. So what can we expect because you're disordered? I think the collective name for personality disorder is just, it's just so harmful, you know. And I'm not a real proponent of labels, really. I just find them a little bit problematic because I think, you know, some people find it really helpful to have a diagnosis, and some people don't, and some people live within it, and some people don't, and everybody's very, very different in that regard. But I just feel that sometimes you can't put these behaviors and these coping strategies and these complex, nuanced personality traits in a bracket that tells someone you're disordered. Because if you're going to start talking about stopping stigma, you know, as a society, well, the stigma's right there in the diagnostic labelling of someone.
Yeah, absolutely. So Gemma, can we go slightly sort of left here, and can I talk to you about your formative moments with music, because I know that music is a huge part of your life.
Yeah.
And you've been a lifelong music head. What was your formative? How did you cut your teeth?
So one of my cousins, who I obviously have no relationship with anymore, introduced me to hip hop when I was really young, and for me, listening to rap music and listening to hip hop and listening to that sort of thing, sort of it aligned really with what my mum had instilled in me as a kid. My mum always had records, and ever in a time of crisis, there was always records. It was always, we'd go to the record player and we'd be like, okay, let's just put this on and just dance it out, you know. And that was probably one of the greatest gifts that she ever gave to me. You know, I've still got her record collection here. I'm looking at it, in fact. And when I heard some of the hip hop music that my cousin was playing, I was able to pick out samples from it and say, oh, that's Aretha Franklin, or, you know, that's Jimmy Smith, the Hammond keyboard player, or that is James Brown, or that's the JBs, or, you know, that's Blood, Sweat and Tears. And my cousin was like,
there's not much more satisfying than, you know, picking
No.
out a sample.
I know, and you know what? I'm still that geek. But so yeah, I started listening to hip hop, and then I just found this world where I could escape. It was nothing like the world I was in. It was this storytelling, narrative telling about other people's lives and other people's worlds, and I was living for it. I was just so deeply involved in the fact that these people were telling me something I didn't know existed. And you know, I'm unashamed about the fact that I like the most ignorant gangster rap. You know, I've got Prodigy from Mobb Deep tattooed on my arm. You know, I'm a feminist who loves the Wu-Tang and loves Jadakiss and, you know, all of that stuff. So I got into hip hop, and then I went from hip hop, I got into going to hip hop events, buying records, you know. So I'd spend Saturdays at Purple Penguin Records or Replay, and then I'd go to hip hop events. We'd go to hip hop events in a transit van. All of us are sat in the back. It was completely illegal, and we'd go to London and we'd go and see people like Tribe Called Quest or Gravediggers or Beastie Boys or whatever. And then when I was 16, I got into promoting. I didn't get any GCSEs, so I had to go to college, and I joined the student union there. And I was like, "You lot aren't representative. You're putting on all these indie nights. Where's all the rap music?" People were like, "Well, if you want to put rap music on, you've got to do it yourself." So I did, and now I'm part of Sip the Juice. So yeah, I've been putting music on for a really, really long time. I'm 43 this year. So yeah, it's a long time. So for me, hip hop became this culture of acceptance. It was a home when I didn't really have one, and it was something that it was a complete avoidant behavior of me to just immerse myself in this culture and everything that went with it. Graffiti, b-boying, apart from beatboxing. I cannot stand beatboxing because I've got autism, so I find it really problematic. But yeah, so that's how I got into music, and from that I've made some lifelong friends, you know, that I would never have made if I didn't have that link to music.
Yeah, amazing. So when did you start working as a mental health nurse?
I started retraining in 2010. Before that, I'd spent about 11 years working in youth offending and criminal justice, and I worked primarily in sex crime and sex education. I spent a lot of time teaching naughty kids in pupil referral units about sex and the law, and that it wasn't okay to touch girls' boobs on the bus stop, and then showing them how to put condoms on a condom demonstrator, and being asked a lot, "Miss, do you like anal?" So I did that and worked a lot with people who were engaged in sexual deviancy or sexually harmful behaviours. and then retrained to be a nurse in 2010, qualified in 2013, and worked on a male psychiatric intensive care unit for a long time, and then became a lecturer in 2016. So yeah, doing both nursing and lecturing simultaneously, which is draining, as well as doing a PhD.
So let's get on to Man Down. Why did you start Man Down? What was the inspiration to start it?
So in 2019, in May, two of my friends attempted to take their own lives, 2 weeks apart. One of them, I was at his bedside when he came round. He rang me at about 6 in the morning, and I had glandular fever, and I could hear the hospital, I could hear the heart monitor, and I knew what he'd done. I was desperately trying to get my clothes on with a swollen throat, listening to him telling me that he'd taken an overdose, running around my house like I was trying to get away from a one-night stand, like the walk of shame, but trying to find your clothes in the dark. And a couple of weeks later, one of our other friends hung himself, and he survived, and he lived in a brain injury unit up until November last year, and sadly lost his fight. But what I realised was that at that point I was nursing, I was lecturing, and I was around people in music still, and I was hearing men talking to me about their experiences, but what I wasn't seeing was them talking to each other. And it really struck a chord when these two people did what they did, and I thought, you know what, this has happened right in front of me. And I could either decide that I've missed it and I'm a terrible nurse and a terrible human and a terrible friend, or I could decide that actually I've got skills. But every time I say that, I always feel like Liam Neeson in Taken. I've got a certain set of skills, but I've got skills in being able to understand people's distress, and I'm a nurse, and I've worked in the industry, promoting as a woman, and that's really, really awful at times. And you're telling me this stuff. We've got to get this space where you can tell each other. So what I decided to do was think about, actually, this is fundamentally from the top. It's about getting into the industries and talking about, look, you've got people working in your industries and they're really struggling. What are you doing? And I'm really deliberate with saying industries, because, as you know, as someone who's been in the industry yourself, there's a multiverse of different types of industry within the music industries, whether it's radio, venues, artist management, being an artist, being a DJ, being a club promoter, being a live venue promoter, being a sound engineer, being a roadie. There's all those people, music plugger. There's just loads of things that go on in music that people don't really think about. And I started to have these conversations, and the more conversations I was having, I was like, we should capture this. We should capture this, because if I can capture it, I can take these stories into the music industries, and I can give some training. And whatever that training will look like will be determined from the film that we make and the stories that you tell us. So because, I've got a bit of a research head on, I used the stories that men told me as a data collection method to inform what the training packages we would deliver as Man Down would look like. So the aim is that we make this film, and that the men tell us their stories, that we write the packages, and then that we go into music industries and we charge the people that have got the money to pay for it, and we train them on meaningful conversations and normalising human distress and not labelling people. And I'll come on to that in a minute. And then what we can do from there is go into charities, grassroots agencies, and youth groups, and teach it for free, so everybody's got access to this knowledge. And in that time, what happened was mental health first aid came out, and in that time COVID happened. And now what we've got is a political well-being agenda, where people have to have well-being on their HR agenda as a tick box, because if they do that, they get tax relief on it. And so people are buying in packages, training people, and they're talking about it, and they're basically focusing on depression and anxiety. But as we know, as we've discussed, there is a broad spectrum of human conditions and human distress and trauma sets that aren't just those two things.
I know that you're a feminist, and I know that I've heard you describe yourself as such, but why did you want to work specifically with men?
Because statistically, men are more likely to take their lives at this present time. Men of working age are increasingly taking their lives. And there's a lot of discussion around that, around COVID and stuff as well. But people in the creative arts are more likely to consider taking their own lives and not access help because of because of appearance, or because of expectation, or because of stigma. And most of those people are men. The reason I came into this is because in 2 weeks, two of the men in my world tried to take their own life. And then I teach suicide awareness, I teach suicide statistics, and they don't lie. Men are more likely to take their own lives than women. There's a real risk to men. And then what we add to that is the statistics around the fact that men are less likely to talk to each other. They're less likely to go and ask for help. What I already knew in nursing is what I found in research when I started to look at it, is that black men are less likely to ask for help, and they're less likely to go to GP surgeries, and they're 40% more likely to be in a mental health facility as a result of coming through criminal justice systems, and they are 4 times more likely to be put on a locked ward at first presentation of an illness such as psychosis. And a lot of the people I was speaking to were men who are from the black African or black Afro-Caribbean communities. Statistically, women are more likely to reach out for help to primary care services and get through to secondary care services, whereas men don't. I am a feminist, and I recognise feminism embraces the rights of all people, and the rights of men, and the rights of people who are trans male, trans female, and it's all inclusive. And I wouldn't be a particularly good feminist if I didn't protect the people around me who are in need, and I wouldn't be a good feminist if I didn't think about the future of my daughter's world, and the systematic failures in terms of male health care that is happening around her as well. It's always an interesting one, and research tells me that men talk to women much more. So getting those stories from men was easy for me. It wouldn't have been easy if it was a man doing those interviews.
Yeah, I'm with you, because I worked a lot on Women's Hour and been very sort of involved in like feminism through that. I mean, when I first got into recovery, basically, I started becoming really interested in sort of feminist politics and sort of seeing my own personal experience within a sort of wider systemic context. So that meant getting into politics and all of that stuff, educating myself. And working on Women's Hour, I just had I think I just had a really kind of eye-opening conversation actually with she was at the time the sort of founder or director of Calm, and also someone who'd spent her life in involved in feminism, and then had this kind of realization that she needed to help men. She felt that like actually women, we do have these spaces now, like we do have safe spaces, and men are being kind of like left behind, I suppose. And you see it in the statistics. Absolutely you do. And obviously, a couple of years ago, this was around this is when I started getting interested in the concept of toxic masculinity.
Yes.
And I was wondering what you think about that term and that concept.
I'm not a huge fan of the phrase toxic masculinity. It's not really my right to be able to say that, though, because it doesn't affect me directly. But I mean, masculinity is the male in our life constantly lives in this state of having to either subscribe to being either not very emotional at all because that's what's expected of you, or being angry in defense of something and having to stand up for something, or being horny. They either need to bring home food or money, or they need to be really good at sex and a really good partner and a really good dad. And they then also need to be really ripped because of social media, Geordie Shore and all those sorts of types of programs, and all of the pro health and men's health magazines and stuff. So they get quite a lot of body shaming as well. Dad bod is a phrase I just want to put in the bin, and manning up is a phrase I want to put in the bin. But there's all of these expectations on men that I suppose unless you take yourself out of your own sort of your own kinesphere, you're not ever going to know what it feels like to have those expectations placed on you. So being a good dad, being a good lover, being a good partner, being a good partner to whoever that is, whatever gender that is, then raising a kid, and then but also being the protector, but then also bringing home money, but then also being really brave all of the time. And then, you know, when you're tired and sad, I'm not okay with that, because actually you're a man, so you just need to deal with it. And those are the stories that men live in. The constant sort of battle for men is, I want to tell my male mates that I'm not all right, but then what if they judge me? And then when you put that in the context of something like music, or something like hip hop, for example, which is the thing I know most about, because that's my area of research for my PhD, you know, there's all of that stuff around posturing, and all of the stuff that, you know, you've got to be tough, and you've got to live within the lyrics and the storytelling that you're in. And now, when we're having a move forward, say for example someone like Man, who's just brought out the Ugly Days EP, where he talks about the fact that, you know, he's not all right some of the time. We're moving into that space now where people can say I'm not all right in something as male dominated and frankly misogynistic as hip hop. But those worlds have got real issues around expectations of each other, and male dominance, and asserting male dominance, and asserting, you know, male bravado, and those sorts of narratives that are really unhelpful. But I think that's really difficult for men. And I think, you know, if you listen to music and you listen to the storytelling in any song that has ever been written by a man, you know, you wonder what they're trying to actually tell you in that. We are moving into a time now where men are able and more willing to use music as a medium to say, look, shit's really not cool. The world is insane and I'm not coping. But generally, what other vehicle do men have? They play contact sports, they do boxing, they go to the gym, you know, they go to the pub. And then all of those things about how men cope or not cope come out in those really negative behaviours of like pack mentality on nights out, getting into fights, getting into territorial fights, football hooliganism, for example. I mean, I did that at master's level. I studied that and the subculture around that, and how men feel emasculated. And now what we're in is a cycle of men feeling emasculated again, because people are losing their jobs because of COVID, or losing their identity as a musician or an artist, and, you know, or as a chef, or as a tattooer, or any of those creative worlds, or worlds that have been grossly affected by COVID. Men are really struggling within them.
So yeah, I wanted to ask you, you know, from what I gather, like your main focus with Man Down is tackling male suicide within the music industry. Is that right?
I would say it's more looking at the male experience of distress and trauma in the music industry, and I'm hoping that reducing suicide rates generally is going to be the outcome. You know, that's the aim. But, you know, the training that will be done for Man Down will be done with everybody in the music industry. It isn't just specific to men. Everybody will have it, but it's just that at the moment men are the biggest crisis. And I think for me, in terms of, you know, reducing suicide rates is you know, that's shooting for the moon, really, you know. But if I reach the stars and I get people talking and normalizing not feeling all right, and not having to pathologize it and getting the medics in straight away, that's also sort of all right as well. I'm happy with that too.
I guess it's really useful from your perspective to talk about, you know, we all do know someone right now who is probably suicidal, is certainly very depressed, is really, really struggling. What is the best, what can you do for that friend, male or female?
I think the most important thing I've learned as a nurse, as a person really, and as a person who's worked with people who are in distress, I think it's really difficult when you are emotionally attached to that person to be anything other than feeling sad that you feel like you're not doing enough, or that you're not enough. And I think it's about separating that relationship. And often people just want to be heard. The reason something like the Samaritans is so successful and it changes lives is because when you ring them, you just talk and people just listen. And I think if you are in a position where you know somebody is actively suicidal, it's about understanding the right questions to ask and when, and to give the right space to let people talk. And often people just want to listen and want to vent. and often they might want to tell you that actually they do have a plan. This has become so common of late because of COVID that I've actually written some guidance, which is on our website under a blog, about talking to someone who's suicidal. And it's about trying to, when you hear the words, I don't see a point anymore, I just want to die, or I want to kill myself, or I'm done, all of those sorts of phrases, then it's really easy to start saying things like, what about your kids? What about your partner? What about your job? You've got so much to live for. And actually, when someone's in that headspace, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but when someone's in that headspace, that's not helpful stuff to say, because all you're saying is you're a shit person because you're going to be leaving these people behind, and that's really selfish. That's the subtext, that people can take from that. That's not what you mean, and that's not what you're saying, but that can be the subtext. So it's about saying, okay, why do you feel like that? Do you want to talk about this? What can I do? Let me listen. And giving people that space. There are tips on there about asking people, which is a really tricky question, people who aren't saying I'm suicidal, but you have your suspicions. There's some tips on how you ask that question and what you do with the information when you get it. Thinking about if people have a plan, if they have the means, and by means, what I mean is, have they got things like rope? Have they got a ligature point? Have they got knives? Have they got pills? Have they got alcohol? Have they got anything they can use to harm themselves? Have they got access to a car with a garage? And are they starting to do things like giving their stuff away? Are they starting to make plans? Are they starting to put their affairs in order? Are they giving you money? Are they saying, do you want this? I don't want it anymore, in large quantities? There's all of those things to look for. And then I suppose the next thing to do is, depending on what stage these people are at, or what stage you feel they're at, is to then get help, 111 or 999, depending on how along they are in their plan. Or, if they're saying, I often have these moments where I feel like this, but I don't have a plan. It's about normalising that conversation and saying, okay, well, when you do have that again, let's talk it through, or just tell me. So there are some people in my life who are feeling suicidal, and sometimes when they feel suicidal or feel like they're having these fleeting thoughts, they just send me a heart, and then I ring, and then we don't say anything. And sometimes they do say something, and sometimes they don't, but I'm just on the end of the phone, and they can if they want to. So it's, for me, listening is the major thing that people don't get right, and it's really hard when you're emotionally attached to someone.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's where you really have to put your own kind of discomfort to the side and just be there, I guess. Thank you for that. That's really useful, and I really like that, that your friend sends you a little heart. I mean, just something really simple like that. That's something I'm gonna take with me. You said earlier that you hate the Stop the Stigma hashtag. Yeah. Tell me about that. Why do you hate that?
What I hate about Stop the Stigma, it's okay not to be okay, time to talk, and all those sorts of hashtags, is that those things are things that we already know. It's sort of stating the obvious. Actually, what we don't need is hashtags. What we need is action. We don't need, those things aren't actions in themselves. Those things are tokenistic gestures of saying, I stand with people who are chronically ill, or who are depressed, and who have low mood. What they're not saying is that I will do something about it. What can I do about it? And not everybody's in a position to do something. I recognise that. But firstly, we need a distinction between mental health and mental illness. Everyone's got mental health, and that fluctuates, and that's perfectly normal, because life is shit sometimes, and it's okay to say that. But not everybody has mental illness. So what we need to start doing is talking about mental illness and distress and trauma in a really transparent way. You can hashtag all you want about someone like Caroline Flack taking their own life because of the media onslaught that was levelled her way. Be kind. But then in the next breath, if you're then having a debate with somebody and calling, I don't know, people names and saying, well, you're a fucking idiot because you can't spell through and thorough correctly, you're not being kind, are you?
I think the Caroline Flack example it sort of illustrates something that I feel is just like sort of left out. you know, you see people posting that they're supporting a mental health charity or blah, blah, blah. It's all great. And I think that's really good stuff. And I think it's amazing, like, how much progress has been made in the last few years in certain areas, you know. But what I think is people are kind of glossing over, like, what actually supporting someone with mental health looks like, because it isn't easy. Sometimes when we're mentally ill, we're just really, really difficult to be around, really, really difficult to maintain relationships with, you know. So, like, rather than checking your friends, checking your friends who are complete nightmares, because they're the ones, you know, that need it the most. And it is, you know, it's not easy, is it, hanging in there with someone, you know, who has a mental illness, or, you know, is in mentally distressed, you know, and sometimes it's just made to seem like so fluffy, like, you know,
and it's not fluffy, you know. It's not this, like, you can't solve everything by telling people that you've hashtagged and hope they're okay, you know. The amount of times people say it's attention seeking, oh, leave her, there's nothing you can do, they're beyond help, just don't help her. And I've been told that pretty much my whole life, you know, by one agency or another, because I'm difficult, you know. And, you know, there's never a time I look at a hashtag and feel comforted by that. I think, you've no fucking clue, because you couldn't, this is never going to engage someone like me. I mean, you know, I think our years at getting older and becoming a bit more self-aware have paid off in terms of the way that we manage our life now. But if I was my 15-year-old self and I saw someone writing about Caroline Flack and Be Kind, and I was someone who was experiencing suicidal ideation, I would just think, fuck all the way off.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, that's the thing that annoys me the most, is as someone who has had mental ill health and experienced stigma and social rejection and, you know, all of that stuff. You know, I see you post this thing and I think that's brilliant. Like, it's brilliant that we speak out, and it's brilliant that we can be more open about where we are on the mental health scale and our own challenges. I also used to work in a mental health charity, music and mental health charity in London, where, you know, it was really the severe end of mental illness. And, you know, just seeing, you know, how is that going to really change their lives, because they're living in abject poverty. You know, they need systemic change. And it was also that difficult thing of, you know, unless you're in complete crisis, you know, what is there? You know, what help is there available? It's like, go and get some help. Well, okay, I've got a 6-month waiting list to get an appointment with my GP. That's why we need systemic change, because that's not good enough.
I know. And I think that's another problem as well, is that no one's really sure what help they're entitled to, how they get it. And particularly at the moment during COVID, it's really difficult to get into even secondary care services, you know, so going to the GP and then them referring you out, you know, that's always been quite difficult, because, you know, I don't want to be political about it, but I will. You know, there's been so many cuts to support groups, day centres for mental health, where people go who've got severe and enduring mental health, where they can go and do things like learning to cook, or be part of arts and crafts, or learn skills that are going to arm them for life. You know, they've been cut. And there's hardly any psychiatric beds, you know, in hospitals. There's nothing, you know. We're really running on empty as a service, as a UK-wide service. You know, unless we signpost to charities and you go private, not everybody's got money to go private. I couldn't afford to go private, and I've been so desperate at points in my life that I had no other choice but to do that. I know it's like 60 quid an hour to see somebody and talk through all of your distress, when part of your distress is that you don't have any money. But there are so many good charities out there that do things like text apps where people can talk via text or live chat, or you know, people can talk to people on the phone. And then there are places that people can drop in when COVID's not kicking everyone's a-hole. But, you know, there are charities that people can go to and engage with. But other than that, you know, we're in a real state of flux in mental health services, and we're completely saturated by people who are in new crisis at the moment, which is only ever going to push people who have got an existing illness back, because they think, okay, well, you're all right for a minute, but they're not. You know, they're not.
Obviously, you're talking about the effect of, like, COVID on mental health, and that is, you know, that's scary and kind of unfolding now. I guess we all know, like, anecdotally, how it's affecting the people around us. there's going to be a high price to pay in terms of the mental health crisis. But in terms of Man Down, obviously we are kind of getting back to life a little bit now, and things are coming out of lockdown, and what's the future for Man Down? Where are things going with you?
Well, the future was really, really uncertain because a lot of our funding streams were cut because we were relying on industry events and festivals. So yeah, that was really uncertain for us. We spent a year just not really knowing what we're doing, but we've managed to. We did a t-shirt collab with Kid Acne, who's a really great artist who's kindly gave us some artwork. We managed to sell enough of those t-shirts to get the film in edit. Whether we've got enough money to finish the edit is another thing. So the film will be finished and the launch will be on the 8th of July. And then once the film is out there, that's when the hard work really begins, which sounds ludicrous really, but that's when I have to find space and time to sit and write and finish the training programs, to think about. I've got to listen to all the interviews again and think about all the stories that I was told, start writing, and then I need to start promoting getting into industries. So we're in a real rock and a hard place. We rely on donations, we rely on people buying our merchandise, we rely on people just being really kind and doing stuff for nothing, but we can't keep doing that, you know. And Man Down isn't a multi-million pound business. It is never going to be that. I'm not in it to see this as my job for the rest of my life. That's not what I want. I just want to do something where I can put my head on the pillow at night and know that I've done something good, and if I can change just one, not just one person's life, but one situation or one event, then that's it for me. You know, I've done something. I've done a good job of work.
I think we're going to wrap it up now, but I just want to hear about one of the happiest days of your life.
One of the happiest days of my life was Lola. You know, as difficult as the pregnancy was, you know, just the even though I was depressed, and I was depressed from the moment she came out, the feeling of looking at somebody who I just loved so fucking totally and unapologetically, and I knew would grow to love me and my eccentricities and quirks as well. And I think, you know, on a really good day, I know the happiest days of my life are now, you know, and with her, and the fact that she still wants to hang out with me and cuddle me and hold my hand in public and tell me I'm great in public, you know. And yeah, she's the happiest, most amazing thing that's ever happened to me, and she, you know, she really did save my life. So yeah, I'm really grateful to her.
Oh, that's beautiful. And what about the song that gives you life?
Oh God, a song that gives me life. There's so many. What a terrible question, Millie.
Just the last, maybe the last one that gave you life.
I would definitely say, I would definitely say Jill Scott Golden every single time I hear it, or A. Marie, One Thing by A. Marie.
Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah,
that's a good one. That's a good one because that always makes me slut drop.
Oh, if you can slut drop it in your 40s, you're a better woman than me. And if you can slut drop post-baby, you're a better woman than most women. So yeah, well done. I think if I slut drop now, I probably need the help of 2 healthcare professionals to get me back up. And that's me operating on very low staffing figures in the NHS.
I mean, I haven't tried it for a while, but I might just give it a go now.
Okay, can you please report back?
I will. Thank you so much to Gemma Jennison from Man Down. I so enjoyed that conversation. Oh my God, so much honesty and insight. What a woman. If you want to find out more about Man Down and also access to that blog post that Gemma mentioned about how to talk to someone who's suicidal, then I've put links to all of that in the show description. And thank you to you for listening. Please do let me know your thoughts. You can come and join us, follow the podcast at Back to Life Pod on Instagram. And I would also invite you to leave a review or rating if you've enjoyed this episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe so that you can be the first to know when the next episode drops, which will be in 2 weeks. Until then, take care of yourself and look out for your nightmare days. soon. Bye.